Welcome back. This is episode 8 of the Voltage series. So, we've covered the foundations, and today we're going to talk about inflammation. Inflammation is one of the most common threads running through modern chronic illness. Joint pain, brain fog, digestive issues, fatigue, skin problems, autoimmune conditions, cardiovascular disease, even anxiety and depression have inflammatory components. Sometimes inflammation is obvious. More often, though, it simmers quietly beneath the surface for years. The challenge is that inflammation isn't a diagnosis. Instead, it's a process. When your body detects injury or danger, inflammation is one of its primary tools for protection and repair. Without it, we couldn't heal. The problem isn't the inflammation itself. The problem is when the alarm stays on long after the threat is gone. There are a lot of reasons that can happen. Chronic infections, environmental toxins, poor sleep, blood sugar dysregulation, gut dysfunction, chronic stress, autoimmune disease, allergies, nutrient deficiencies. These are all capable of driving inflammatory signaling. Today, I want to focus on one cause that often flies under the radar because I only recognized it in myself about a month ago: mast cell hyperreactivity. If you felt vaguely inflamed for years with reactions that don't fit standard allergy patterns, if you respond strongly to fragrances or chemical or weather changes, if your symptoms migrate and change in ways that confuse doctors, this episode might be particularly relevant for you. So, let me start with what mast cells are and what they do. Mast cells are immune system cells found throughout your body. They're concentrated in tissues that contact the outside world: your skin, your respiratory tract, gut lining, and others. Their job is to detect threats and respond quickly. When a mast cell senses a trigger, could be a pathogen, an allergen, a chemical irritant, physical pressure, even temperature change or stress, it degranulates. This means it releases the inflammatory mediators that are stored inside of it. These include histamine, tryptase, cytokines, leukotrienes, and many others. This response is appropriate when there's an actual threat. It's the first line of immune defense. The inflammatory cascade that follows brings other immune cells to the area, contains the threat, and then supports repair. The problem arises when mast cells become hyperreactive. They release mediators in response to triggers that aren't actually threats. Or they release too much too easily, producing inflammatory responses out of proportion to the stimulus. This is mast cell activation syndrome, MCAS or MCAS, in its more severe form. Many people have milder hyperreactive patterns that don't meet the diagnostic criteria for MCAS, but produce significant symptoms. And I think this was me until recently. The symptoms are wide ranging because mast cells are everywhere: skin reaction, hives, flushing, itching; respiratory symptoms, congestion, sneezing, asthma like reactions; digestive issues, bloating, cramping, food sensitivities; cardiovascular symptoms, racing heart, blood pressure changes; neurological symptoms, headaches, brain fog, anxiety, fatigue, sleep disruption, temperature sensitivity; reactions to fragrance, weather, chemical stress. What makes this confusing is that symptoms migrate and change. The mast cells in different tissues respond to different triggers. Someone might have skin reactions one week, digestive issues the next, and respiratory symptoms during weather changes. Standard medical workups often miss this because each system gets investigated separately rather than recognized as one underlying pattern, which is a problem with our medical system today. We don't look at the body as a whole, we silo it into different parts. Well, how does all of this connect to voltage? Inflammation requires cellular voltage. Mast cells are constantly degranulating. They drain voltage from the tissues that they're in. The cells trying to function in those inflamed tissues can't maintain proper electrical gradients. The whole local environment becomes voltage depleted. Chronic mast cell hyperreactivity means chronic voltage drain. The interventions that help mast cells and the interventions that support voltage significantly overlap. Reducing inflammation supports voltage. Supporting voltage reduces inflammation. So the systems are connected. This is also why the voltage framework helps make sense of mast cell conditions. The condition isn't just immune dysfunction. It's a systemic issue involving cellular energy, electrical function, and inflammatory regulation all together. So, what does the protocol look like? I'm going to share what worked for me while acknowledging that individual response varies. This isn't medical advice. This is what I did and the result I got. Quercetin is the foundation. Quercetin is a plant flavonoid found in onions, apples, other foods. But at therapeutic doses, it requires supplementation. It stabilizes mast cell membranes, reducing the likelihood of inappropriate degranulation. And it also has direct anti-inflammatory and antioxidant effects. I use quercetin phytosome. The phytosome formulation has better bioavailability than standard quercetin. 2 doses a day, split, morning and evening. Okay, bromelain. Bromelain is an enzyme from pineapple that has anti-inflammatory effects and supports tissue repair. It also helps with quercetin absorption, and I take it alongside the quercetin. Vitamin C in larger doses than the RDA. So vitamin C has natural antihistamine effects and supports overall immune regulation. 1,000 milligrams or more daily during acute periods, less during maintenance, but I take liposomal vitamin C. Sometimes vitamin C can be a trigger for people with mast cell conditions. It doesn't appear to be for me, and liposomal C is less likely to cause a reaction than regular vitamin C. Okay, I'm an herbalist, so nettle infusion, strong nettle tea, not the bagged grocery store version. I brew dried nettle leaves overnight to produce a concentrated infusion that I drink throughout the day. Nettles have natural antihistamine properties and support kidney function for processing inflammatory mediators. Also, I do hydrogen water. Molecular hydrogen has anti-inflammatory and antioxidant effects through specific mechanism. I use hydrogen tablets that produce molecular hydrogen when dropped in water. Several glasses daily during active inflammation, less during stable periods. Now, I will say that I have used the hydrogen water generators. After you do the tablets, you realize those generators really aren't supplying you much hydrogen. So I'd save my money and use it to buy the tablets. Okay, gynostema, also called jongulan, is an adaptogenic herb that supports overall function without being stimulating. I recently added that to my protocol. I say that, but I've actually drank gynostema tea for ages, but now I do it on purpose. For acute episodes, I add an antihistamine, Zyrtec, temporarily. I don't like to take medications. When I say acute, for me, it's super acute. I cannot breathe. For me, I get a skin reaction and I get respiratory symptoms. Also, if you are having trouble modulating this with an antihistamine, take Pepcid. I know that's a digestive thing, but there are 2 histamine pathways and one is through your gut. So if you really want to know if it's mast cell, if you take Pepcid and it helps, you probably have an episode that is mast cell pronounced, right? So the supplements are the long-term approach. Antihistamines are only tools for acute moments for myself because I don't like to take pharmaceuticals. But this is also all supplemental to the practice of grounding, light, sleep, hydration with minerals, movement, breath, and stress management. These all reduce overall inflammatory load. The supplements then have less to do. So, how do you know if mast cell issues are relevant for you? Some indicators, and we've kind of covered this earlier, but symptoms that migrate and change. Skin reactions one time, digestive issues another, respiratory symptoms during specific weather. Not the consistent pattern of a single allergy. So for me, I noticed that I don't usually have allergies. We did move to a new place, and I started having allergic reaction during pollen season. It was pollen season. There was pine pollen everywhere. But I also noticed something else for me, that I had an episode on a monthly cycle. I wrote down every time I had an episode, and it was roughly 1 month apart. So when I did research, I recognized that progesterone is it helps your mast cells regulate. And I'm postmenopausal, so I thought, well, maybe progesterone is having an effect. So I did add low dose progesterone to my stack, and thus far have not had any other issues, even in response to things that began to trigger me. And I was being triggered not just by environmental allergens, airborne ones, but ones that would touch my skin, which I never have issues with. But I was harvesting feverfew and I got a rash, which it can cause in some people, but it never caused in me until recently. Same thing with tomatoes and tomato plants. And now I'm not having that reaction again. So you can also have reactions to many other things: fragrances, chemicals, weather, food, stress. The threshold seems unusually low across multiple triggers. Also, symptoms that get worse over time without obvious cause. Mast cell conditions often progress as sensitization builds. Standard allergy testing showing positive reactions to many things, but specific allergy treatments not fully addressing symptoms. So this is interesting because years ago, during COVID actually, I would feel just generally unwell, but never get sick. And I kept getting COVID tests because I didn't want to pass it on to someone. Never had COVID, never got COVID. So I went to my doctor and said, I think I'm maybe allergic to something. So he did the allergy panel on the back, and he goes, well, congratulations, you're severely allergic to everything, basically, except horses and feathers for some reason. And I'm like, huh. But at the time, this was 6 or 7 years ago, I didn't know about mast cells. What I know now is if that happens to you, but you don't seem to be allergic, that is mast cells, because you're actually putting that, when they do the pricks on your back like that, they're actually hyperstimulating those mast cells. And so a lot of people with mast cell hyperreactivity will show as allergic to everything, even though you're not seeming like you are. If you have a history of unexplained symptoms that doctors can't fit into a diagnosis, years of conditions that didn't quite match anything, response to antihistamines providing partial relief, if antihistamines help, histamine is involved. Histamine is the most familiar mast cell mediator. Improvement with anti-inflammatory interventions, even when specific diagnosis is unclear. For formal evaluation, a knowledgeable allergist or functional medicine practitioner can assess. Tryptase levels are one marker, though they're not always elevated, even in confirmed cases. Other markers you can look for in lab tests include N-methylhistamine, prostaglandin D2, and others. You can also try a quercetin trial, 2 weeks of quercetin phytosome at therapeutic doses. If you feel noticeably better, mast cells are probably involved. If nothing changes, they may not be. So, what about diet? The low histamine diet is often recommended for mast cell conditions. So many high histamine foods can trigger symptoms in sensitive individuals. Aged cheeses, fermented foods, processed meats, leftovers, certain vegetables, and alcohol. For me, this is so interesting because I eat a lot of high histamine foods. I ferment a lot of things. And I eat avocados almost every day, which are super high histamine. That was not affecting me, even in the middle of flares. Whether dietary histamine matters for you depends on individual sensitivity. And some people are highly responsive, and that diet will produce dramatic improvement for you. But others aren't as affected, like me, by dietary histamine because my issues are environmental or inflammatory rather than dietary. So you could do a 2-week elimination trial of high histamine foods as a practical test. If you feel better, dietary histamine matters for you. If you don't, it doesn't. And you can keep eating your fermented foods and aged cheeses without anxiety. I personally, I tolerate these things well. So my mast cell issues are clearly environmental and inflammatory rather than dietary. So what about the worry this might cause? Mast cell conditions are often presented online. So if you go to the chat rooms, the Reddit subreddits and whatever on mast cells, you'll see that it's severe, lifelong, progressive, and limiting. The forums and patient communities concentrate the most severe cases because those are the people most motivated to seek community. This isn't representative of the population. Most people with mast cell hyperreactivity have manageable conditions that respond well to appropriate intervention. Many people with mast cell issues live normal lives once they figure out their triggers and supplements. If you suspect mast cell involvement, don't catastrophize. The framework is useful for understanding what is happening in your body. The interventions are accessible and often effective. The trajectory for most people is towards stabilization, not progression. And I will caution you on this. When you look up mast cell hyperreactivity, you will get the Google AI little block, and it'll be highlighted, and it'll say, mast cell hyperreactivity is not curable. There is no cure. It is incurable. I actually don't believe that, and I don't believe most things are incurable. I just think we haven't found the answer to a lot of things yet. So don't let that smack you in the face, okay? Don't let it freak you out. So practical recommendations. If the symptom pattern described in this episode resonates, try quercetin phytosome for 2 weeks, 500 to 1,000 milligrams twice daily. Notice whether you feel different. Address foundational inflammation through the other voltage practices: sleep, hydration, movement, breath, stress management. These reduce mast cell triggering significantly. And consider environmental triggers. Start writing things down. You are your best experiment. If I hadn't tracked what was going on, if I hadn't written down, I would not have noticed that it came every month. If you write things down, you'll be able to see your triggers and your patterns more easily. For acute episodes, antihistamines can provide bridge supports while the supplements work. If symptoms are significant, please work with a knowledgeable practitioner, functional medicine doctors, naturopaths, or allergists with mast cell expertise. So, next week, we'll cover gut health and the microbiome. The gut is foundational to inflammation and through it to voltage. The interaction between gut, mast cells, and overall function is significant. For now, mast cells. The framework that might explain symptoms you've been managing piecemeal. The protocol that might help. Thanks for being here, and I'll see you next time.